All right, this is the Voice of Motown podcast. I'm Tyler Pepe.
And I'm Brendan Horton, suffering WVU fans.
All right, hey guys, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Voice of Motown podcast. We're trying to get those numbers up, so we would greatly appreciate the support. Let's jump right into it. The Mountaineers fell to Kansas State on senior night by the score of 48-31. This was Garrett Green's first start. The Wildcats were ranked 19th. It was Dante Stills and Bryce Ford Wheaton's last game in Morgantown. So there were a lot of things to be excited about. However, this game had a wild first quarter that saw 47 total points. The West Virginia defense gave up 41 first half points. The Mountaineer offense couldn't get any consistency in the second half. And one of WVU's most reliable kickers in its program's history missed a field goal and 2 extra points. So the game ultimately ended in disappointment. What were your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, it was definitely a wild ride. I felt like, for it being senior night, it was, there really wasn't as much energy there in the stadium, being there in person. Definitely a lot of anxiousness between fans whenever, there was a mistake made. There's definitely some Fire Neil Brown chants going along. A lot of people shouting and yelling and, kind of getting irritated, just fed up with everything. The play on the field, I thought definitely had its ups and downs. I think, Garrett Green had some good moments. He had some bad moments. The defense, obviously, with just looking at the scoreboard, the defense really didn't do much. And, again, it was just a consistency thing, where there were moments where you felt like WVU could stick in the game, figure out a way to have a chance to win at the end. And then there were other times where it felt like they didn't belong in the game. So just kind of the stuff that we've seen from Neil Brown over the past 4 years or so, all kind of encapsulated in one game.
Yeah, 100%. It feels like it's just stuff fans are kind of getting numb to. But, let's try to talk about a little bit of positives. Let's talk about Garrett's first start. He had that bad interception early in the game, but he bounced back. And you have to kind of expect some questionable decision in a quarterback's first start. So overall, I was pretty pleased. I actually think he can be a decent player because I still think he's going to get better as he gets older, whether that ends up being at West Virginia or with another team, just depending on how this offseason shakes out. I think his decision-making will improve with some more game reps. Overall, he finished with 221 yards, 4 touchdowns, and unfortunately, he had those 2 interceptions. He was sacked 3 times, which hurt his rushing stats, of course. But like I said, overall, I thought he did all right for his first start.
Yeah, I did too. I definitely think if he would get more reps, he would improve on a lot of the mistakes that we saw. And, as we kind of speculated last week, that what's he going to do whenever a team takes away his legs? And Kansas State did a really good job of, taking that away. And if, you looked at the defense Kansas State was running, they were keeping their safeties up pretty close to the line of scrimmage. And they were really testing Garrett to beat him deep. And he did that several times. The fact that he hit, several deep passes, particularly to Sam James, was very encouraging. I mean, there's still the moments where, he was maybe not necessarily making the right decision, but I think in terms of arm talent, you could see that he has an arm that really plays up for the college game and can really make some electrifying plays out there. And you combine that with his legs, he could become a really, really good player. He might have the highest upside of any quarterback on the roster. Maybe he's not as game ready as maybe someone like a Will Crowder or Nico Marchio could technically be in terms of, just being able to go out there and run the offense. But in terms of being able to go out there and single-handedly run an offense by himself and just be a playmaker, I think that he's probably the best guy that we have at quarterback right now. And I would love to see him continue to get a start next week against Oklahoma State. And, depending on what happens over the offseason with JT Daniels and Nico and Will Crowder, I would feel good about him potentially being the quarterback next year as well, depending on who the coach is and what system we bring in. But overall, yeah, I was pretty pleased with what I saw. A lot, like I said, I think navigating the pocket, he definitely struggled with. Some of those sacks weren't necessarily because of the offensive line, but those are things that are correctable. I didn't see a lot of things that were big red flags where you say you just can't play him. And again, like we said last week, I don't see why he wasn't playing over Jared Dagey last year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it keeps going back to that. Everyone made the case that you couldn't throw him out there, but I mean, obviously he improved a lot over this past year. But I think you can make the argument that you probably should have gave him opportunities. And honestly, prior to the Oklahoma game, I wasn't even sure he was good enough to be a Power Five quarterback. But over these past two games, he's kind of proven to me that, yeah, as he keeps getting better with the right system, he could be really successful depending on who he's playing for. And just going back to the game, the penalties certainly didn't help him in this game either. 8 penalties for West Virginia. It only cost them 46 yards, but a lot of those penalties were just drive stallers. Look at that drive to start the second half. I believe they had like 5, 6 penalties just on that drive alone. And that ended up resulting in 0 points because of a missed field goal. The delay of game penalty on the extra point, which seemed to just suck all the momentum away from WVU because Leg ended up missing the PAT. Lots of penalties. Like I said, the yards didn't add up to a lot, but it just seemed like they were real drive killers. But before we move on from Garrett, another thing I really liked was his press conference after the game. He took responsibility for bad decisions, the pick six. He seemed very mature and just handled himself nicely. I thought, if it looks like he's not going to play next year, which I would understand because you have Nico waiting there. I honestly hope he goes somewhere and just has a nice career someplace because just watching him these past couple of games, I think he's too talented to just be a bench player his entire college career. Like I always say, you only get one opportunity in college. Once your years are up, your career's done. And most of these kids don't go on to the pros. So I just wish him all the best, whether it's here or somewhere else. So, yeah, that's how I feel about Garrett Green.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think his answers were very encouraging to me. I mean, I felt like, he's handled everything that he's went through from, fans calling for him to play last year to, JT Daniels coming in to, kind of the tough love approach that Neil Brown has taken with him, rightfully or wrongfully. So he's taken it in stride and been very professional about it, waited his turn, just kept on working. And, it kind of showed in the press conference how he's willing to take accountability for things as well, too, and admit his mistakes. And it's something that, I don't think we've always seen from people in this program either. And I'm not just talking about players. I'm talking about, the coaching staff who really doesn't necessarily take direct accountability for some of the things that happened in games. And it's encouraging to see that that's not rubbing off on some players, especially young guys like Garrett.
Yeah, 100% with you. A couple other guys I want to highlight. Jalen Anderson and Justin Johnson ran the ball very well. And those are two guys I hope we don't lose through the transfer portal once this offseason shakes out. Whether they're starters, whether they're backups. I just really hope WVU hangs on to those two guys because not only do I think that one of them could be a starter, but, if CJ comes back, if Tony comes back, they're very good complementary backs. And I just like the way they ran the ball.
Yeah, I like everyone in our backfield right now. And it was great to see Jalen Anderson have some success in there and him actually getting some run. He's a guy that we called for earlier in the season to see some more touches, especially when we were starting to get banged up in the backfield. And it feels like they finally gave him an opportunity. And, he's a different runner from Justin Johnson. He's much more of it seems like a power speed combo. He has a nice burst, but he's also able to lower his shoulder and fight for extra yards. He is a bigger back. And, he was a 4-star coming out of high school. So was Justin Johnson. So we have a lot of talent back there. I think it's great to have that position so kind of loaded, if you will. And I'm really hoping that, like you said, these guys hang around because it's a great opportunity for all of them. You don't necessarily need to be a bell cow back to get noticed to make it to the next level. And I think, these guys splitting carries is just going to help them all out because it's going to keep them healthy. It's going to keep them fresh. And it's going to, allow the WVU and whoever the next head coach is to be a little bit more creative with how they want to call their offense. Because when you have 3 or 4 really good backs, you can do some fun stuff.
Yeah, 100%. You can run both of them out there, put one in motion. Definitely opens up the playbook. And after a rough start, WVU had a chance to tie that game up with a pick six of their own. And then it just seemed like we went into classic Neil Brown. A player didn't run onto the field for a PAT. WVU has to take a delay a game. And then Casey Legg misses the extra point. His kicks have looked kind of off ever since Malshevich got hurt. And a holder isn't a position you think about a lot, but it has been critical for Casey Lake's success. It seems like he missed a 44-yard field goal, and he was 1 for 3 on extra points on Saturday. So could all of this really be the holder's fault, or do you think there's more to it?
I think it has to be on the holder. I mean, I feel like the long snapper holder kicker relationship is all kind of equated to each other, and it's like a perfect science where it comes down to timing, it comes down to where the ball's placed, how it's rotated, timing, all that other stuff, and the littlest change to that can really screw you up. I mean, the one thing that I always think of this year is I believe it was the first game of the season this year, the Steelers and Bengals, where the Bengals long snapper got hurt and their kicker missed um, 3 or 4 different field goals with the chance to win the game. And it's just things like that. That's a professional kicker who last year was one of the best in the league, played in the Super Bowl last year. And it was a big reason why they made it that far because of his clutch kicking. And just that one little small change, just whoever's snapping the ball, not even the person who's holding the ball, affected him that much where he wasn't able to make a kick. And, moving from Malasevich, who's been holding all year and doing a fantastic job, to Colton McGee, who's a punter. And, it's hard to say how much he's actually practiced holding the ball over the course of the season. Whenever you have someone like Malasevich, who's been so reliable. And it can just really throw things off. Last week, we didn't really notice that much because McGee was holding last week too, and Legg made that game winner. But I don't know what changed this week that kind of, maybe Legg was just a little late on things. Maybe he wasn't, maybe the cold got to him, maybe it was the wind. It's hard to say, but you definitely think you can chalk it up to not Casey Legg being bad, but more of just that group needing more repetitions together because that time be down pat.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, it's so much about timing. The snap and the kicker's already in motion. The ball needs to be down. It does play a big role. It's something you don't think about a lot. I mean, coming into that game, Legg was perfect on field goals, and the only PAT that they didn't, get to count was a bobbled snap. So I mean, it wasn't a miss by Legg. It was just they didn't get the ball down. So yeah, that is kind of concerning. But we only got one more game left. But it definitely played a role on Saturday. And then also the defense, man. The defense had a horrendous first half. They allowed 41 points, and they only allowed 7 in the second half. Which, I mean, Neil Brown always tries to put a positive spin on that. But if you're allowing 48 points overall, then it doesn't really matter if you're performing well in the second half, because overall you're just not doing enough to help your team win. It's just unacceptable. And I'll give the defense credit. They had a decent stretch of good defense for the last, I don't know, about 10 quarters over these last couple games prior to Saturday. But they got absolutely torched against Kansas State. There's really no way to sugarcoat it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think Kansas State presents kind of a unique problem too because they spread the ball around on offense. Will Howard, has a good arm. He's been really, really careful with the ball the past few weeks. And that early pick, I was really hoping would throw him off his rhythm that he's been in the past 3 weeks or so. It didn't. And they were just playing well. Another factor that played a lot into it too was just, WVU's defense didn't start off with great field position very often either because Knowles was, it seemed like, returning the ball to the 35 or so almost every time we kicked it off him. Grotehouse even kicked one out of bounds. So it's just not helping your defense when you start out like that. But, you also have to be able to get off the field. You need to create some negative plays. And with someone against like a Deuce Vaughn, he's not going to get gobbled up in the backfield too often. And, Kansas State is just a really reliable, consistent team who's not going to shoot itself in the foot. There's a stat I heard, I think on the way down to the game, where they said Kansas State has the fewest turnovers in the Big 12 by a pretty big margin over the past 4 years or so, which was the Kleeman era. And, it makes sense because that's kind of Kansas State's brand. You don't shoot yourself in the foot, just go out there and play. And, that's hard for a team like WVU where, you're really just hoping the other team make mistakes like Oklahoma did. I mean, how many passes did Mims drop behind the defense in that Oklahoma game? So, I mean, some of it's getting lucky, but you can't get lucky against a team like Kansas State who isn't going to shoot themselves in the foot and just has a lot of really good, solid, reliable players. And ultimately, that's what killed WVU. They made the smart play, they made the right read, and they just got beat. So I wasn't necessarily expecting us to shut down Kansas State, but giving up 48 points was a little crazy. Obviously, you can give 14 of those points probably to the offense because those 2 turnovers. But other than that, I mean, that's still 34 points, and that's a lot, especially, when you say 27 of those were in the first half.
Yeah, they're very disciplined. They've been that way for decades, all the way back to Snyder. And then it almost seems like Kleiman was the perfect hire for them because he's almost like a modern day Snyder at that. His teams are very disciplined, but they seem, I don't know, even more innovative on offense. So it was just like the perfect hire, it seems like. But yeah, the defense gave up way too many big plays. I think that's why they were playing decent against Iowa State, Oklahoma, the second half of TCU. They were keeping those big plays to a minimum, but unfortunately, K-State, they just went back to their old ways, and it's kind of sad because they kept Deuce Vaughn kind of under wraps as far as Deuce Vaughn goes. I mean, he was under 100 yards. I'm not even sure if he got a catch that game, but they just got lit up in the passing game. And then the backup halfback Giddens, went for 49 yards for a touchdown. You mentioned Malik Knowles. He was not only good at wide receiver, but he was making so many good plays on special teams. It's just a bad day for the defense and special teams.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, it was just a hard game for the team to match up with. And it also didn't help some of the coaching decisions that were made, especially at halftime or right before halftime, where Kansas State hit a field goal. Neil Brown was calling timeouts, trying to get time to drive. Offense sputtered out, and Kansas State was able to get the ball back and kick another long field goal themselves. And I want to give some kudos to Kansas State's kicker because he was actually kind of like I don't know if he was their punter or backup punter, but he had to step in the past few weeks to be the kicker. And he had never made a kick. I think the stat was over 40 yards so far. And he came out there and hit that 52-yarder in the wind, in the cold, in Morgantown. So very impressive by him because I wasn't expecting that kick to go in. We were safe when we when we got Howard back. I think it was a 5 or 6 yard loss on that play. I thought we were safe and we were going to go into halftime without them getting another 3, and he came out there and drilled it. So kudos to him. Obviously, I don't think we would have been in that situation if our coaches handled the final 2 minutes or so of the second quarter better, but you got to give credit where it's due.
Yep. Can't agree more with you there. Some other, excuse me. Sorry guys. If you haven't been able to tell, I got a cold and my voice is kind of shot, but trying to plow through this. Some other big news that happened on Saturday is, what are your thoughts on Charles Woods? If you ask me, disrespecting his teammates by announcing his transfer right before kickoff on senior night seems like a disrespectful move. I just think the timing's weird. You can argue whether you're mad at Charles Woods for leaving or whether he has a reason to leave, but why not wait until after the game or after the season even? Because if you guys don't know how the new transfer window works, technically he can't leave until the season's over. So I mean, he's stuck here for a couple weeks. So why make that announcement just hours before senior night kickoff? I thought that was very odd. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's probably the weirdest transfer situation that I've seen. And I know we're kind of young in the transfer portal era, but I can't think of anything that comes close to this. You know, he was really praised coming into the season, and it felt like the coaching staff was really trying to work with him to get him back on the field. Obviously, while also playing around whether he wanted to burn his potential medical red shirt this year and come back next year, or do things like that. And I mean, it seems like the coaches were trying to work around that, because obviously we'd have loved to have him back if he was able to get that extra year of eligibility. But to do that before senior night when you could have walked, and then left, um, or announce after the game, I think that was it's just really disrespectful, like you said. And the fact that he did it right before the game, it felt like he was kind of trying to send a message. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but I'm curious as to what that message is. Who upset him? Was he upset that WVU wasn't playing him? Was he upset that we were playing him? Maybe when he wasn't ready to come back. And another kind of potential scenario too is he being tampered with? Because his tweet actually said commitment coming soon, or commitment announcement coming soon, which to your point, you can't transfer until after the season's over with. So who is talking to him? How are they talking to him? What's the situation there? And is the NCAA going to do anything about it? It's extremely strange. And, it seems like it's becoming all too common under WVU. And I don't know if it's just because we're losing, or if it's because we're kind of I don't know the right word to say it, but kind of a black swan in the Big 12, where we're kind of on an island and, really don't have, we recruit different areas in all the other Big 12 schools. We exist in a different climate. So, and we also have to recruit pretty far away for a lot of our guys because we don't produce homegrown talent. It was actually funny. I took my son and a few of his friends down to the game, and they were asking, why is West Virginia not as good as Ohio State? And it just comes down to resources, money, being able to have that pool of talent close to home that you can really pull from. Ohio State gets the best kids in Ohio, and the best kids in Ohio are some of the best in the country. If West Virginia gets the best kids from West Virginia, you're getting maybe the 400th and 500th best player in the country. So if you're lucky. So it just is a bad situation for WVU, and I feel like we're being preyed on, especially because we're one of the poorest schools as well. And it's kind of worrying with kind of the situation that we're in as well. So I'm really hoping that there aren't more Charles's Woods, but it definitely seems like there's a lot going on behind the scenes that definitely isn't helping our program at all.
Yeah, well, I definitely think winning has something to do with it. Obviously, that's not the cure all, but I mean, that's been the story since day one. Winning does cure a lot of problems. Now, if we start winning, would that immediately stop all these transfers? No, but it would definitely slow them down. You wouldn't see as many, I don't think. Um, and I do think that's a big reason for it. Also, in the past 4 years, how many kids has WVU sent to the NFL? Not a lot. Not like in the Dana days or the Rich Rod days. And that might have something to do with it too. A lot of these guys are trying to have a career in the NFL. And, if you're not winning, if you're not seeing a NFL in your future at this program, I mean, it kind of all adds up after a while. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why you see some starters leaving. Like we mentioned earlier with Garrett Green, I would not, if it's kind of announced that Nico's going to be starting next year, or JT, I wouldn't blame Garrett for leaving because he needs to go play somewhere. But what's concerning is seeing these guys who are bona fide starters leaving. Like if Charles Woods came back next year, no one is questioning whether he would start or not. And so it's disappointing
Right.
to lose guys like that. I can get over a backup transferring who sees the field occasionally, but these bona fide starters that keep leaving, it's definitely a red flag. And I don't know if the coaching staff has anything to do with it. Charles Woods was a weird situation because he played in 4 games. Maybe the coaching staff asked him to play in these last few because obviously they're playing for their jobs. They don't have next year possibly. So maybe they wanted Charles to play, and maybe Charles, who obviously has NFL aspirations, said, I kind of want to come back healthy next year and put a full year on tape for scouts to see. And who knows? Who knows what's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's really, concerning. And then, after the game, we saw speculation that CJ Donaldson might be entering the transfer portal as well, removing all mentions of WVU on his social media pages, which, can or cannot be a sign that someone's willing to leave. And, that's another guy who obviously was basically the starter, took over that job with very limited reps and experience at the position and really excelled before the injuries. And, that one is really frustrating to me as well. Obviously, Charles Woods is kind of on the clock to get more tape out there for scouts to see him. But, someone like CJ Donaldson, who's a true freshman, has at least 2 more years before he could, go pro, has plenty of time to come back and really make a name for himself, put the tape out there, and get noticed by NFL scouts if they weren't already taking notice after his early season. And there's a lot of speculation that Miami might be knocking at the door and other schools, and I think that's kind of the problem that we're seeing right now with college athletics is there's players like WVU who take under recruited guys like a CJ Donaldson or even Charles Woods, for example, a guy who kind of flew under the radar and was a transfer from a smaller FCS school to come here and really kind of blow up. And other schools are taking advantage of that and saying, oh, well, we missed you, but we want you now. And that's not good for a program like us. Now, if, we're winning, does that change anything? I don't know. But for someone like a CJ Donaldson, would going back home close to Miami be good for him? I mean, Miami's kind of a train wreck on their own, but it's really frustrating as a fan to see situations like this pop up and over and over and over again. It's kind of the same culprits. So, what are your thoughts on the CJ Donaldson rumors and the whole kind of teams picking up on our uncovered gems and trying to poach them away from us?
Yeah, well, I just want to make it clear to all the listeners. CJ has not made any announcements. Like Brandon said, he took some WVU related content off his social media, really all of it. But then shortly after, he put it all back on after there were some rumors circulating on social media. So, it might seem like we're overblowing the situation since we don't know whether he's leaving or not. But this is exactly what players do before they transfer. They take off all their content at their current school. We've seen it several times since this transfer rule has changed. So who knows? I mean, fortunately for us, like we said, he put it all back on. Maybe he is staying. Maybe that was just some mistake. But it's definitely worth keeping an eye on, seeing that. And you're right. I mean, Miami seems to be the team that is taking a lot of these guys away from Morgantown. And that's where CJ's from. So, it's definitely concerning. But you asked what are my thoughts on teams doing that? I mean, let's not act like the NCAA has always had good morals prior to this transfer rule. I mean, this is just how it is. I mean, if you can take good players away from schools that don't maybe have as big a name, you're going to do it. And I'm not sitting here saying I like Miami and what they're doing is right, but it's just the way college athletics have been for a long time. So I'm not going to sit here and get red in the face about it. It's just how it works.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I feel like it's fine if a player wants to transfer due to the situation. I like the graduate transfer rule. That was, I think a good move to give players an extra year eligibility and also help further their education. What I really have a problem with is players recruiting, or not players, but coaches recruiting players who are currently on other teams um, during the season or even while they're just even on the team. I mean, I think of, the NBA and the NFL, like things like that. People want to say the transfer portal is free agency for college athletes. If it's free agency, then there shouldn't be tampering. And that would be like if the Baltimore Ravens called up TJ Watt when he was on the last year of his deal and said, hey, come sign with us after the season's over with. We're going to give you, $30 million a year to come play with us while he's still under contract with the other team. And, I know we don't value we don't really highly set the bar high for the NCAA's moral value and kind of how they think those things should be run. But that should be something that, if you want to empower players, and prepare them for the next level, you can't just have them doing these backdoor deals and all this other stuff. That's, not good for them. It's not good for other people when these schools with these big NIL pools and big donor pools aren't necessarily out there for what's best for the player. They're what's out there for the best of the program. One guy that I think of is Tyke Smith, who was, basically a lock to be drafted by the NFL in the first 3 rounds if he would have stayed after his junior year, had he stayed at WVU another year and left just a year early. Instead, he chose to transfer to Georgia, and now he's buried on the depth chart and hasn't really played much. Another guy is Drayshawn Miller, who was a starting cornerback when he was getting some late round NFL buzz after his junior year. And he went to Auburn and left the team and had to walk on at NC State, and those were guys who were starting and in really good situations at WVU, and they had a chance to make it to the league. And now they're kind of grasping at straws because, they went to another school who maybe promised them a little bit more than what WVU could promise them in terms of money. And they're sacrificing millions of dollars that they could potentially have at the next level because these people were getting in these young players' ears when they were potentially probably still on WVU's roster. And it's kind of the same situation as Charles Woods and CJ Donaldson. So, maybe selfishly I'm saying this because, I want to see great WVU players and starters stick with the team. If a backup transfers, I get it. But, also because it's not good for the players. These other guys they're just going to over recruit the position if they need a hole there. And if the guy doesn't end up working out and you're giving him $100,000, it's only $100,000, where, at WVU, it's a little bit more than that. And, I really wish the NCAA would come down and make a rule and really make an example out of someone. And I feel like Miami is the big name, at least for West Virginia, in terms of this tampering. And, I would be all for the death penalty, so to speak, the SMU treatment of Miami of this. Now, partially, again, because I'm a WVU fan and I don't like the Hurricanes, but also because if you set an example with someone, it might change things a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a scumbag move. And without a doubt, I mean, these adults are preying on these. I mean, I guess they're considered young adults. I mean, they're 18, 20-year-olds. But I mean, these are guys who, if you just flash a little bit of money in front of them, I mean, it's probably more money than they've ever even dreamed of at such a young age. And so it's very easy to manipulate them and lure them to your school. And like you said, it's not working out for some of these kids. It's really derailing their football careers. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the NCAA is the only one who can stop it. I mean, we can sit here and complain all we want, but until they start I know they just made some rules to it and regulations recently, but I mean, it doesn't seem like they're enforcing them. It doesn't seem like they're strict enough because it's still just going on the same as it was before. So I feel like that transfer rule's been in long enough that the NCAA should have a handle on it, and they just simply don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't mind the 1-year free transfer rule. I think that's fair in an environment where coaches can move from school to school as much as they want. And even giving them extra, transfers if their coaches are leaving or their recruiters are leaving or things like that, because it's about relationships. But the backdoor deals are what I'm most concerned with. And that's, I feel like schools are taking step by step, seeing how far they can push it. And they're going to push it as far as they can go up until, you're seeing ESPN ticker headlines on the bottom of the screen saying Alabama has offered West Virginia wide receiver Caden Prather a 3-year, $200,000 a year contract to come play for the Crimson Tide. And NCAA probably still wouldn't do anything, but that's kind of the path we're going towards. And now, obviously, that's the way the NCAA is going towards with everything, the super conferences, these mismatches of conferences that make absolutely no sense geographically. The amount of money that's being thrown at college athletics in spite of traditional rivalries. It's all about money. And, we might only be a decade away from where it is truly, 1 year scholarships for players on teams and basically NIL free agency for your top players. So if that happens, I don't know what I would do as a fan, because I love the tradition and the familiarity that you get with those 4 or 5 years with a player on your school. And, if I just want to watch a league where there's free agency and player movement, I'll just watch the NFL because it's a better product.
Yeah, it's a good point. And to kind of just wrap up all of this, players coming and going, Rodney Gallagher announced he'll be visiting Penn State again on social media. So, if we lose Rodney, the excuse of we need to keep Neal and bring him back to keep these recruits, that's out the window. Because, if you lose your top recruit, I got a feeling some other big recruits will follow. So, there's literally just no reason to hang on to Neal at all at this point, even though there's very little chance he's coming back regardless. With Rodney kind of teasing going to Penn State instead of WVU now, let's just get him out of here and let's get an AD in here so we can start the process of rebuilding.
Yeah, and this is the problem with starting the process so late. You're probably not going to have a head coach now, regardless, but you might have a better foundation if you fired Shane Lyons and Neal Brown earlier in the season, or even, after the Kansas game, or even if you want to go a little bit later after the Texas game or something like that. But, right now we're just trying to race through so many different things in order to get things done. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty around that. We've already seen, I believe, 2 players decommit. Rodney's obviously sniffing around other places. Some of our highest recruits are looking elsewhere. And, even if you want to say bringing back Neal will keep those guys, Neal hasn't been able to win with those type of guys either. So it's not really worth keeping it, even if you are going to lose all those players. On top of that, you're also potentially going to face a huge swath of transfers that comes out that had a good relationship with Neal, or other coaches that aren't going to be retained. And it's kind of worrying. Right now our defense is really depleted. The starters that we have are seniors, with the exceptions of maybe 2 or 3 guys. On offense, we're losing a couple quality offensive linemen. The good thing up there is that most of our offensive linemen are West Virginia natives, so hopefully they would stick around. But when you look at the skill positions, Caden Prather was injured in the Kansas State game. Now, if it was an injury or if it was a injury, aka I'm transferring injury.
I'm pretty sure he had a concussion. Like, I thought that at first too, and I dug a little deeper, and I'm almost 100% sure he was in concussion protocol. But I'm not gonna lie, I had the same thought when I first saw that.
Interesting. Well, that's good to know. I'm really hoping that he sticks around, because the point that I was getting to is that, when you're interviewing head coaches to come here, obviously you have the transfer portal that you can pull players from, but there has to be mutual interest. And I feel like if you have someone who might be more ready to come in and take over a program like WVU and get them winning, you have to have some sort of foundation. And with the players that we're losing, with the potential players we could be losing to transfers, it sounded like Sam James, who could have came back next year, probably played his last home game as a Mountaineer. I don't know if Bryce Ford Wheaton has another year or not, but I have a hard time thinking that he would be back. You have the questions at quarterback. You have questions with CJ Donaldson and, that loaded running back room. Are all 4 backs going to stay? Are we going to lose half of them? I was joking earlier today in a group chat that we have with Brad that we're going to be running, an Army Air Force style offense, triple option, wing T, and, someone out there wished for an offense built around a running quarterback, and they're going to get their wish because we're not going to have any other skill positions. So it's a really concerning point that we're at right now. And, you know, as a WVU fan, and obviously as someone who talks about them for over an hour a week, you know, it feels like this is rock bottom for WVU. I can't think of a time during my lifetime of 34 years that the team has been anywhere close to this situation, especially in an environment where things are moving really fast forward for a lot of different things when it comes to conferences and NIL and all this other stuff. And WVU needs to get on the ball so that we don't fall behind because other teams are making moves and you can't be fumbling and making mistakes right now at this junction of the NCAA.
Yeah. I mean, the attendance last Saturday was 37,000, the lowest since 2013 when Iowa State was in Morgantown. And that reportedly had around 32,000, which I believe, because if you remember, we were there. Our buddy ran on the
Mhm.
football field that game. Shout out Jake Lynch. But yeah, I think that's all that needs to be said. You know, when's the last time a ranked team came to Morgantown and nobody showed up to watch? Fans are just checking out. Here's the biggest thing Neil Brown has robbed West Virginia fans of, and that's hope. You know, the hope of a successful season, the hope of knocking off a big ranked team, the hope of being even ranked ourselves in the top 25. I just feel like all West Virginia fans don't even have that thought anymore. Like the hope of even winning Saturday, most fans didn't even think it was possible. Whereas, you know, previous head coaches, even on down years, you always thought, well, hey, maybe we'll knock off this big team and ruin their season. The hope's just gone, it feels like. For the first time in our lifetime, we have back-to-back losing seasons. It's been 43 years since that's happened. West Virginia has finished with a losing record only 3 times between 1999 and 2018, and we're about to have our third losing season in 4 years under Neil Brown.
And the
So,
first one
what's
was
that?
Rich Rod. The first one was Rich Rod's first year too, right?
Right. And then Dana had one, and Nealon only had 3 in his entire career here. So, you know, I think it's safe to say Neil isn't getting an extra year, but here's the thing. If the new AD doesn't get hired until January, which is what some people are saying, it's going to be right around the beginning of January, maybe a little before, then, you know, some of the better options out there may have already been picked over. And we might just end up with another guy whose ceiling is 6 or 7 wins. So, I mean, I don't know. I think you nailed it. It's concerning.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you talk about fans not having hope for this season and getting knocked off. I'm, you know, concerned about next year and the year after, and you know, how long is this rebuild going to take? Because, you know, like you said, if we're dragging out this AD search too long, obviously that's an important piece to get right. But it's not as crucial as getting the right guy in at, you know, head coach, head football coach, because the AD, you just need someone who's, you know, kind of does what the opposite of Shane Lyons did, and that's can play nice with donors, can hire the right people, can admit when they're wrong. You know, it's a pretty low bar I think you have to clear. Just don't be a bumbling idiot and, you know, get someone in, someone that you can trust. You know, obviously the donors I think are going to have a lot of pull in this situation. They're going to want to get someone who they get along with, who they feel comfortable donating money to. And it seems like that was the big reason why they wanted Shane Lyons out is the big donors just were done with him. They you know, they looked at the numbers and people were stopped donating. They distanced themselves from the program. They never came out and said who some of the big donors were that stopped donating, but or reduced their donations. But I mean, for a school the size of WVU, if you have any sizable donators, do, people stop donating or reduce the amount that they're donating, that's a bad sign because we don't have, you know, the alumni base of like an Ohio State or a Texas or a USC where all these people are out there making millions of money, millions of dollars. That's a pretty small pool to pull from. So I'm really hoping we're able to go out there and get a quality head coach candidate because we need it. And, you know, I'm hoping that a 2 or 3 year rebuild doesn't turn into something that could drag on for the better part of a decade.
Yeah, and speaking of Shane Lyons, he already found a new job with Alabama, and you know all the info came out on his buyout as well. He's going to get paid $2.1 million in his buyout. And, Alabama already hired him to be the executive deputy director of athletics. And if you look, his job at Alabama prior to WVU was deputy director of athletics. So it makes sense that they would give him that job that's just right underneath that position. And let's be honest, the NCAA jobs are based largely on who you know and having connections. So I saw some fans online are claiming that WVU must have made a mistake by letting Lyons go because, why would Alabama hire him so quickly then? Well, like we just said, Shane, without a doubt, still has connections down there at Alabama. So it shouldn't be a surprise that he landed a job there. I'm still fine with West Virginia letting him go.
My favorite part about him being hired back at Alabama is that, his the acronym for his position is Executive DAD, Deputy Athletic Director. I think that's amazing. But anyways, I think, there are things that Shane's good at where, he did a lot at WVU when it came to building up facilities and doing things like that. And when he was at Alabama before, he was in charge of budgeting and resource allocation. And it feels like that's probably something he's good at, kind of the operations side of things. But when it comes to the, collecting money, encouraging people to donate, building relationships, we've heard through the grapevine that he isn't a very personable person. He's kind of arrogant when it comes to things. So having him be the face of your athletic department probably isn't going to work out. But when it comes to someone you want behind the scenes handling things, I think he's good at that. And he's proven that he's been good at that. And that's not to say that Shane is a completely incompetent person to have in your athletic department. He's just good at certain things and not good at others. And the things that he wasn't good at are the things that you need in your athletic department as your athletic department head. And Alabama, he doesn't have to do those things. He just gets to do what he's good at. And, he landed on his feet. Good for him.
Yeah. And another thing you always heard about him is he was really, really concerned, almost to the point where, people were worried he wasn't concerned enough about his own school with being on all these committees, like playoff committees and stuff like that. And so, of course, Alabama would want a guy like that in their corner who, again, has connections with all these committees that are very important to a team like Bama, which is in the playoffs every year.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But moving on from all of this, WVU takes on Oklahoma State at noon this Saturday. After finishing the season starting the season 5-0, the Cowboys have gone 2-4 in their last 6 games. Oklahoma State still has something to play for, though. This will be their senior night, and with 7 wins, they of course are going to a bowl game, so they'll be looking to improve their bowl position with a victory. And then on the other side, you have West Virginia. They're trying to send seniors like Dante Stills, Bryce Ford Wheaton out as winners, and the coaching staff is possibly trying to audition for their next team because they probably want to get hired from someone else next year. So what are your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think Oklahoma State isn't as good as I thought they would be. Their defense has been just flat out atrocious this year, which is kind of surprising for a Mike Gundy coach team. Normally his defenses, even after losing a lot of players, are usually pretty solid, but they are allowing 32.1 points per game, 473 yards per game. And their offense is okay. I mean, it's above average, I would say. It's not good. It's not great. But I think the combination here is, they really have a lot of holes in their team. And it's a team that I think WVU in a normal year probably would match up pretty well against. But the thing that I think really hurts WVU is that Oklahoma State only has 1 road win and they're undefeated at home. And WVU going into Stillwater, that's a place that Oklahoma State feels comfortable in. And, right now with questions around WVU's head coach, with no bowl eligibility on the line, and really this isn't a game that really means a ton for Oklahoma State. So, playing spoiler really isn't in the cards either. This feels like a game that Oklahoma State should win pretty easily.
Yeah, Vegas thinks so as well. They're like 9.5 point favorites. I think I saw it's
Oh, wow.
9 or 9.5. So yeah, I mean it's a big spread. To your point though, like you said, Oklahoma State's defense isn't quite as scary as we're used to seeing them. They're allowing over 30 points a game, but make no doubt about it. If West Virginia doesn't play disciplined football, which they have problems doing, Mike Gundy's defense will definitely feast off those mistakes. But like you said, the Cowboys offense isn't that good. We mentioned it earlier. They're 6-4 in their last 6 games, and Spencer Sanders has vastly underperformed in those games. 7 of his 9 interceptions were in those games, and he's only completed 53% of his passes in those 6 games. So, I mean, WVU needs to force mistakes and not let Sanders get in a groove, and they can probably keep it low scoring and give themselves a chance. Their leading back, Richardson, has been banged up a lot as of late. He didn't even play last week. And as of tonight, Monday night, I'm not sure what his official status is. I couldn't find it. I'm sure they'll announce it tomorrow. But if he can't go, that'll certainly favor the Mountaineers because their next leading rusher is Spencer Sanders, and all their other backs have under 200 yards on the season. So they don't really have anyone else to really rely on. And their offense is only averaging 12 points in these last 4 games. And so it is a game the Mountaineers could win, but like I keep posting online when people talk about whether we're going to win next week or not, 4 wins, 5 wins, who cares? I mean, no matter what, it's a disappointing season. Don't get me wrong. I'll be watching. I'll be rooting for them to win. But even if we win, I don't think it's anything to get real jazzed up about.
Yeah, I agree. And, kind of looking at what the key for Oklahoma State's offense is obviously, we've highlighted Spencer Sanders, but it's how he performs in the game. Whenever he performs well, they win. When he doesn't, they lose. And it's really that cut and dry. They have not won a game this year where he is held either under 250 passing yards or where he throws more than one interception. They've won every other game. So, I mean, I don't know when we've had a quarterback who had a hard time hitting 250 against our defense. So, I mean, it just kind of points to if Spencer Sanders can take care of the ball, this should be, a pretty comfortable win for Oklahoma State. And if we start looking at their defense, while they're not necessarily a great defense, they do have some weapons. They have 5 guys right now with 3 or more sacks. This is an aggressive kind of havoc causing Mike Gundy defense where they're going to get after the quarterback. Their interior defensive linemen aren't great, but they have guys who can get after the quarterback. They're going to, make you kind of look at different things, and they're going to try to force interceptions. And the guy who's going to be trying to get interceptions on that defense is Jason Taylor, who is their safety right now, and he has 5 picks. But yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily a matchup that really favors WVU in too many ways right now.
Well, another interesting thing is, and might make people want to watch the game more, is I'm sure this will be announced tomorrow at Neil Brown's press conference. But who's he going to start? Is he going to go back to JT? Is he going to let Garrett keep growing? Or is he going to give Nico a run? Because I don't know. It's kind of weird to where Neil Brown's head is, because I'm sure in the back he's been told whether he's coming back or not, would be my guess. And if he's coming back, I would definitely favor him starting Nico. But if he thinks he's still playing for his job, I mean, I don't know. Who do you think he rolls with?
I mean, I would think that you have to go Garrett Green, or if you want to go with anyone else, I would go with Will Crowder. I think it's a tough situation to throw Nico in right off the bat. It's a road game, and if things go poorly, I mean, against a team who's aggressive like Oklahoma State is on defense, that kind of sends the wrong message as well. It's a really risky play to just throw Nico out there, even though he may, he has the opportunity to go out there and potentially have a good game. But I think there's too many factors that are against WVU. You don't know which players are engaged, which players are going to go out there and feel motivated to go 110%. And that's especially important on offense, where if you're the quarterback, you're reliant on the other players around you giving it their all every play. You don't want to have an offensive lineman who is just kind of going through the motions. You don't want a receiver who's not working to get open. All those things are just going to hurt Nico. So I think the safest choice is to go Garrett Green, get another game under your belt to see what you really have, if he's going to grow, if he's going to learn from his mistakes. And obviously Will Crowder, it wouldn't hurt to see him either. I don't think I would play JT Daniels right now. I think you let him recover, get back to 100%, which I do expect he's banged up, and let the next coach kind of figure out, do I want JT Daniels or do I want to stick with one of these other three guys? I don't think Neal really, I don't necessarily know if he's been told behind the scenes that he's gone, because I know the assistant athletic director has said that he's not going to be making the call. He's going to leave it up to whoever the new AD is. And I'm sure that's what Neal's being told as well. But I'm also sure that Neal knows that the likelihood that he's retained by a new AD is very unlikely. And unless they're hiring an AD with the purpose of telling him that you have to keep Neal, I would say it's less than a 3% chance that Neal is our head coach next year. So, what's best for Neal? Probably sticking with Garrett Green. What's worst for Neal? I would say playing Nico, because if he would get hurt and you're kind of throwing a freshman quarterback out there to the Wolves on the road, that can hurt your reputation too as a recruiter. So that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, no offense to JT, but I don't see any reason to play him at all in this game. I hope he gives Garrett Green another start, give him a bigger sample size to really see what you got in him. And then if the game gets ugly, put Crowder, Nico in, and maybe give them a few reps and get some game film with those guys. That's what I hope he does. I don't know. We'll find out more tomorrow in the press conference. But moving on to basketball to wrap this up, West Virginia basketball is coming off a couple impressive victories over Morehead State and Penn, but they have their first big test, and that'll be on Thursday night against Purdue, who is 3-0. Definitely excited to see the Mountaineers get tested. The only bad thing is the game starts at 10 o'clock at night on Thanksgiving night, so you better get those naps in early, folks. What are your thoughts on this game?
It's going to be really interesting, especially because Purdue is notorious for having really tough interior players, and they have one this year in Zach Edey, who's been there, I feel like, for 6 or 7 years now, even though I'm sure that's not true, but he is a legit 7'3", 7'4" big man who has been dominant throughout his career at Purdue. And it's going to be an interesting matchup to see how, Bob Huggins' new big men, Bell, Waggy, I always want to mispronounce his names, Okonkwo, etc., are able to match up with someone who, you're probably not going to see in our Big 12 play, but someone who is skilled and dominant enough down there to see how you're going to handle them and how they're going to handle someone who's that big and physical. So that's what I want to see the most, because it's been encouraging to see these new big men play really well against smaller, less skilled teams. But how are we going to do against legitimate inside presence?
Yeah, that's exactly it too. I can't wait to see them get challenged and see how they respond. The game is in Oregon. If some of you are wondering why it's so late, that's why. The game's in Oregon. It's the Phil Knight Legacy Tournament. And another interesting thing is, if WVU wins the game, they will take on Gonzaga, which would be fun since Huggins gave them some bulletin board material earlier in the season, saying that they would have a hard time in the Big 12, although Texas might have proved them right when Gonzaga and Texas versed each other. But, that's a tough travel. But I think WVU's performance in that tournament will really let us know if this team's for real or not. Or, and even if they perform badly, maybe they just need a little bit more time to gel before Big 12 play. Because keep in mind, a lot of these guys are playing with each other for the first time. So, it's the matchup we've been waiting for, because West Virginia is making easy work of these first four opponents.
Yeah. Kind of as an aside, I'm really excited, and I think it's really cool that we got invited to the Phil Knight tournament, because normally, the in-season tournaments that we play in have some directional school in it, and maybe you play a good team when you get to the finals. But having a playing in the Phil Knight tournament is, we just talked about it, Purdue, Gonzaga. I mean, there's some big names in it, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be a real challenge, especially when our non-conference schedule isn't super great this year. It's much more of a kind of button things up sort of schedule, which I think is probably best for the team. But we also get sprinkled in little challenges like this here, and I really hope that we can beat Purdue, because it would be fun to see how this team, who Bob seems to enjoy coaching, who is really confident in, can match up against a team who's really skilled in Gonzaga, and what type of success these guys can have against a team that's much more skilled and filled with higher rated recruits than WVU.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And that's it for us, guys. My voice is kind of shot. Sorry if it was too nasally. Hopefully I'm 100% next week, and I'll be bearable to listen to. But as always, thanks for listening. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We really appreciate you guys getting those numbers up, and thank you for listening. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving.